What can we learn from what little we know of the life of the Sophist Protagoras, who is featured in several Platonic dialogues and the few fragments of his sayings that survive? What does Protagoras mean when he says that man is the measure of all things? Does this refer only to perceptions, or does he mean that man can measure his own moral principles? Did the teachings of the Sophists corrupt the youth of Athens? Why did many Athenian jurors trying Socrates believe he was a sophist? And why did Aristophanes accuse Socrates of being a sophist? There are so few fragments of the works of Protagoras that survive that we have reflected on all the fragments we could find. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. The Sophists were itinerant professors who traveled from city to city. They were not primarily concerned about determining the objective truth. They cared about teaching the art and control of life. Although they did teach grammar, poetry, and philosophy, they were primarily interested in teaching rhetoric, a skill which was essential for political life and addressing the assembly. They also taught practical lessons on winning lawsuits, as Aristophanes notes in his play, The Clouds. And the older Sophists were respected. Often they were selected to be ambassadors for their cities, since they frequently traveled. But in time, their perceived moral relativism hurt their reputation. But Copleston also notes, on the plus side, the Sophists were willing to draw from multiple traditions, and often their borrowing was more practical than systematic. In particular, Protagoras was friends with Pericles of Athens, though Diogenes says he escaped from the city when he was indicted for blasphemy because of his book on the gods. Diogenes says there are several stories on how he died. Protagoras may have drowned on the way to Sicily, or he may have died in old age, as Plato also suggests. Why was Plato so hostile towards the Sophists? During the trial and execution of Socrates, many jurors thought he was one of the hated Sophists who many thought were corrupting the youth with their teachings. What formal charges were brought against him by the Athenian citizens? Socrates was accused of showing impiety towards the gods and that he was corrupting the youth. During his trial, Socrates defended himself against the notion that he was a sophist, and he mentioned how the slander was spread by the comic Aristophanes in his play mocking Socrates, The Clouds, many years before. So Plato is really defensive about how Socrates, who teaches for free, is not a sophist, who often charge their students handsome sums. And why was Socrates being tried by the citizens of Athens? In ancient Athens, there were no prosecutors. Anyone could bring charges, and a jury of 501 citizens would hear the case and decide the punishment, always in the same day. Athens had recently lost the Peloponnesian Wars against Sparta, and had thus lost her empire, and many partially blamed Socrates because several of his students were implicated in this defeat. One leading character on all sides of the Peloponnesian Wars was Alcibiades. He could have been the Napoleon of Athens, but his enemies managed to derail his career each time he was on the cusp of winning major victories for Athens. Had he led the forces of Athens after Pericles, today we might be studying the history of the worldwide Athenian Empire rather than the Roman Empire. However, the Greek legends and myths always warn against the dangers of hubris, but Alcibiades was not merely guilty of hubris, he was guilty of outrageous hubris. After he was exiled from Athens, he advised the kings of Sparta. But then he seduced the queen of Sparta, and she bore him a child, which meant that hubris led to his exile from Sparta. Alcibiades played a leading role in all sides of the Peloponnesian Wars. In the Platonic dialogues, he crashed the symposium party right after Socrates had delivered his speech. Several Platonic dialogues discuss the friendship of Socrates and Alcibiades, including the symposium and the dialogue Alcibiades. After the Spartans won the war, they forced Athens to set up a tyranny of 30 aristocrats. The leader was Critias, another former student of Socrates. These were no benign tyrants. Very quickly, Critias and his associates started a rule of terror similar to the French Revolution, where they executed first their opponents, and then they started executing their fellow aristocrats so they could seize their property. Now, how did the comedy, The Clouds, damage Socrates' reputation? Socrates is ridiculed in his first entrance in the comedy where, suspended in a basket, he's gazing up through the clouds. Aristophanes' Socrates only cares about teaching useless knowledge, such as how far fleas jumped, and out of which end gnats buzzed, and gazing at and pondering the moon. Many of the Sophists concentrated on teaching rhetoric, That is, the manipulative techniques of public speaking with little emphasis on moral principles. Just like debating clubs today debate positions selected at random by the participants. And the Sophist Socrates in the play instructs his students on how to mislead and manipulate their peers, and how to avoid their debts. This Sophist Socrates is not concerned with justice, which is why Socrates has to defend himself against this slanderous portrayal by Aristophanes. And now you can understand why Plato was not only so adamant in demonstrating that Socrates was not a sophist, but he was also interested in showing how the Sophists were indeed the ones corrupting the youth of Athens, and not Socrates. Protagoras was born in 481 BC in Abdera in Thrace, near Macedonia, and came to Athens in the middle of the century. He was favored by Pericles and was in Athens at the beginning of the Peloponnesian Wars in 431 BC. He also witnessed the plague that killed 2 of Pericles' sons, and also many Athenians, including Pericles himself. But Diogenes does not provide any details. Diogenes describes Protagoras as the first to charge the fee of 100 minas, which scholars estimate is 100 times the daily wage of a skilled worker. The first to distinguish the parts of time, perhaps he's referring to verb tenses, and to stress the importance of the opportune moment, and to furnish disputants with rhetorical gambits. In argument, he neglected meaning in favor of verbal jousting, giving rise to today's shallow debaters. He was also the first to use the Socratic form of argument. So, was Democritus the teacher of Protagoras? Diogenes says he was, but the footnote says this was not possible, as Democritus was a generation younger. Although the Protagoras entry in Dr. Wikipedia sides with Diogenes, his entry for Democritus says that he was born 30 years after Protagoras. And though Plato does not mention Democritus, Aristotle mentions him frequently. Although Democritus was also born in Abdera, he was not a traveling sophist. Rather, he was a naturalist philosopher. He is best known for naming atoms as moving about the universe in a vortex, generating all composite things: fire, water, air, and earth. Now, these are not quite the same as the building blocks of matter as described by John Dalton in the 19th century. Dalton had borrowed the word atom from Democritus, not the concept. Fewer than a dozen fragments survive of the works of Protagoras that Diogenes lists. We have the same problem with his famous quotes as we do with all pre-Socratic philosophers. Scholars are forced to guess what they mean. Diogenes of Laertius says in his short biography that Protagoras was the first to say that there are 2 sides to every question, opposed to each other, and that the soul is nothing apart from the senses. Protagoras begins one of his works with, "Man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not." And the ancient author Sextus Empiricus also quotes this fragment, continuing the quote from Protagoras. And for this reason he posits only what appears to the individual, thus introducing relativity. What Protagoras states then is this, that matter is in flux, and that the senses are transformed and altered according to the times of life into all other conditions of the bodies. And summarizing this quotation by Sextus, Protagoras says also that the reasons or logoi of all the appearances are present in matter, so that matter, so far as it depends on itself, is capable of being all those things which appear to all. And men, he says, apprehend different things at different times owing to their differing dispositions, whether in a natural or unnatural state. Moreover, precisely the same account applies to variations due to age, and to the waking or sleeping state, and to each several kinds of conditions. We really do not know exactly what he means by natural or non-natural states. Although most of us agree that morals should not be relative, certainly our perceptions are relative to our own experiences and our abilities to perceive. Sextus continues quoting Protagoras. Thus, according to him, man becomes the criterion of real existences, for all things that appear to men also exist, and things that appear to no man have no existence either. Now, Copleston discusses the debate between scholars about what he means when he says man is the measure of all things, and this debate can never be resolved, as that first sentence is all that has survived of his work. Does he mean the individual man or the human race? In other words, who determines the truth, the individual or the culture? What does he mean by things? Do things refer to what our senses perceive? Do things refer to ethical values and judgments? Plato discusses this in the dialogue Theaetetus when he argues that knowledge is not sense perception. The Athenians, according to Diogenes, expelled Protagoras from Athens for declaring, "As for the gods, I cannot know either that they exist or that they do not exist, for many things hinder knowledge, including uncertainty and the brevity of human life." Diogenes suggests that Protagoras is a bit greedy for fees. When he asked one of his students for his fee, he said, "But I haven't won a case yet." Protagoras replies, "It doesn't matter, for if I win this case, I should get the fee for winning it, and if you win it, I should get the fee because you did." Plato, in his dialogues, suggests that Protagoras is a relativist. When you teach young ambitious rulers rhetoric and debate skills, their political ambition often leads them to reject truth and justice. These are ethical tendencies in all men, but these can only develop in the organized community. Therefore, he must absorb the whole social tradition of his community. This social tradition is not absolute truth, but it is the norm for a good citizen. Aristotle has a passing reference to Protagoras in his essay on rhetoric. He gives an example of what a student might argue for someone who is accused of a violent assault. If the accused is not tall and imposing, they could argue to the jury that his small stature means that it is unlikely that he committed the crime. But if the accused is a large and imposing man, they can still argue that he was not likely to commit the crime. He says that this is what Protagoras means by making the worser argument appear the better. Aristotle continues, "Hence people were right in objecting to the training Protagoras undertook to give them. It was a fraud. The probability it handled was not genuine, but spurious." And the main sources for the philosophy of Protagoras is the early Platonic dialogue featuring him, and also the dialogue Theaetetus, later dialogue on epistemology or knowledge. Now we'll discuss the sources used for this video. The primary source for the life and sayings of Protagoras is the life of the eminent philosophers by the ancient biographer Diogenes of Laertius. He is also the primary source of all the writings of the Greek Stoic and Cynic philosophers, and many pre-Socratic philosophers such as Heraclitus, and was a major source for the writings of Epicurus. Frederick Copleston, an influential Jesuit professor, has excellent summaries of the pre-Socratic philosophers, although out of necessity his primary source is also Diogenes. He also discusses the then current scholarly consensus on various topics relating to Protagoras and the Sophists. And the Wikipedia page for Protagoras directed us to a collection of the surviving fragments and references to Protagoras. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.